All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the most absolutely astonishing true stories of human endurance and engineering you're ever going to hear. It's 1973. Two men, Tim and Lee, get slapped with a 12-year sentence in South Africa's maximum security facility, Pretoria Prison. Now, this place was a fortress, specifically designed to break spirits and lock men away forever. But as we're going to see today, human ingenuity has a really funny way of finding the cracks in even the thickest concrete.
Okay, let's just dive right into the sheer impossibility of this. For 20 straight years, this facility had a flawless track record, zero escapes. Anyone who even tried was caught or worse. And yet Tim, Lee, and another inmate named Leonard actually managed to shatter that perfect record. And honestly, the craziest part? They didn't pull this off with explosives or some kind of high-tech gear. They literally did it with scrap wood. So let's take a look at what they were actually up against.
Part 1. The Impenetrable Pretoria Prison.
To really wrap our heads around the magnitude of this escape, we have to look at the environment. This was not your average lockup. We are talking about 20-foot sheer walls wrapping the entire perimeter. Digging a tunnel? Yeah, completely out of the question. The complex was just way too massive. But the human obstacles, they were even more terrifying. The security force was relentless, led by this notoriously brutal guard named Mark, who watched the inmates like a hawk. Every single move was scrutinized.
Moving on to Section 2, Apartheid and their rebellion.
So before we get into the nuts and bolts of the escape, it's really important to understand why Tim and Lee were stuck in Pretoria in the first place. Back in 1973, South Africa's justice system was operating under the strict political system of apartheid, which meant inmates were totally segregated based on the nature of their offenses. Listen to this backwards logic. Inmates in blue uniforms, who were convicted of violent crimes like murder, actually received relatively decent treatment. But Tim and Lee? They wore gray uniforms. They were white men who had secretly handed out flyers protesting the government's segregation laws. Under this system, political dissidents in gray faced far more brutal conditions than actual violent offenders.
The stakes absolutely could not have been higher. Right after they arrived, this old prisoner, a guy who'd been inside for 2 decades, pulled them aside. His warning was pretty chilling. He just said anyone who tries to escape dies. He basically told them to scrub the idea from their minds completely, mostly because even the other inmates were known to act as informants for the guards. It was just an environment of total paranoia and absolute control.
All right, Section 3, the master plan, wooden keys.
So if they can't tunnel under those 20-foot walls, and they obviously can't climb over them, well, they had to walk right out the front doors. But pulling off a masterstroke of engineering like that takes serious time. I mean, it took 23 days just to even come up with the idea. It wasn't until day 74 that they managed to smuggle in the basic materials. Fast forward to day 142, and they're still stuck solving complex mechanical problems. The whole operation, it took a grueling 404 days of agonizing patience, systematic planning, and the literal daily risk of execution.
It all kicked off with one massive realization. Tim is sitting in his cell feeling completely trapped when he realizes the lock on his door is kind of just staring back at him. It was the only way out. So in this moment of sheer adrenaline, right after a guard walked past, Tim rolls up a little piece of scrap paper and shoves it into the keyhole. When he pulls it out, he's got the exact diameter and depth of the lock. Just like that, the blueprint was born.
But here is the million-dollar question. How do you craft a working key when you have no metal, no tools, and no original key to copy? Well, it was a masterclass in trial and error. To even get the design, their teammate Leonard would drop his food plate on purpose just to distract that brutal guard, Mark. While Mark was busy yelling, Tim would lock his eyes onto the keys dangling from Mark's belt, memorizing the intricate cuts purely by sight. Then, during shop time, Tim would hide small chunks of wood inside his opaque water bottle, stuffing a cloth on top so it wouldn't rattle if the guard shook it. Later, in the dead of night, he'd sketch out the designs from memory and start carving.
Okay, Section 4, Dangers and Obstacles. So Tim finally carves a wooden key that pops open his cell door. Amazing, right? Well, that victory lasted all of about 3 seconds. He steps out of his cell only to run right into what they called the steel door problem. This was a secondary barrier at the end of the hall. The catch? The lock was on the outside of the door. So standing on the inside, there was absolutely no physical way Tim's arm could reach through the bars around the solid steel plates and insert a key. It seemed completely impossible.
But let's look at how they tackled this, because the solution is literally brilliant. They came up with what I call the broomstick mechanism.
First, Tim carved this tiny wooden block with a hole in it and stuck it onto a regular old broomstick. He placed his newly carved wooden key into the block. But wait, he still couldn't see the keyhole on the other side of the door, right? So he attaches a little mirror to the stick to act like a periscope. Finally, and this is my favorite part, to keep the wooden key from falling out of the block while he blindly poked it through the bars, he secured the whole thing using chewed-up gum. Chewing gum. Incredible.
Of course, the complications didn't end there. Near disasters were basically a daily thing. One time, a wooden key actually snapped off inside a steel door's lock while a guard was literally walking down the hall toward them. In a total panic, Lee tosses Tim a knife, and Tim manages to pry the broken wood out with just seconds to spare. Another time, they desperately needed a map of the prison's outer layout, so they set up a dead drop in a trash bin, trading soap and cigarettes with a black cleaner who smuggled in an outside newspaper. And just to highlight how real the stakes were here, our sources note that this brave cleaner was tragically executed by the state later on for smuggling items to prisoners. This was not a game.
Imagine the absolute sensory overload of being in that environment. Picture this. It's late at night, Tim is out in the corridors testing keys, and he's sweating so much that actual drops of sweat are puddling on the floor. At one point, a heavy-set guard almost catches them hiding in a supply closet. The guard walks past, missing them by inches, but steps squarely in Tim's puddle of sweat. The guard looks down at it, pauses, and miraculously just wipes his boot and keeps walking. Talk about heart-stopping.
But honestly, their closest call happened in broad daylight. The warden decides to spring a surprise inspection on Tim's cell. In the chaotic rush to hide everything, a broken piece of a wooden key falls right onto the floor. The warden picks it up and is staring dead at it. This is a literal death sentence. But without missing a beat, Tim looks the warden right in the eye and goes, "Oh, it's a photo stand for my parents." He just calmly takes the piece of wood and props a picture frame up with it. And it worked! The warden bought it, called Tim an idiot, and just walked out. The sheer nerve.
Which brings us to Section 5, the final night of freedom.
All right, it is day 404. The keys are tested, the map is memorized. Tim, Lee, and Leonard put on their normal, civilian clothes right underneath their prison uniforms. They unlock their cell doors for the very last time and step out into the dimly lit corridor.
And almost immediately, everything goes wrong. Remember that heavy-set guard? Well, he goes to use the restroom, but the toilet gets jammed. To fix it, he heads straight for the exact supply closet our guys used to hide. Worse, the guard unknowingly takes the piece of wire the inmates usually use to hold the closet door shut from the inside. So now, the inmates are forced to dive into the closet as the guard comes back, but they have no wire. They are holding this door shut with just their bare fingertips while the guard stands inches away on the other side. They are literally seconds from getting caught, until that same old prisoner who warned them on day one suddenly starts smashing his own light bulbs and screaming at the top of his lungs. He draws the guard upstairs and completely saves their lives.
So they slip out, moving through the complex, unlocking door after door. But then they hit a wall, a barrier they couldn't carve a key for, a purely electrical door. There is no keyhole. It only opens if you press a button inside the guard's office. Luckily, with that heavy-set guard still upstairs dealing with the old man's diversion, Leonard sneaks into the empty guard's room, hits the release button, and the electrical door just buzzes wide open.
Now, they are standing at the very last door, separating them from the street. Tim pulls out his final set of wooden keys. He slides the first one in. It doesn't turn. He tries the second. Nothing. Frantically, he starts cycling through every single master key he spent the last year carving. His hands are shaking as the devastating truth sets in. Not a single one of them fits this final lock. After 404 days of planning, they are completely trapped right at the finish line.
Panic completely takes over. Tim says they have to abort. They have to go back. But Leonard, he absolutely refuses. He looks closely and realizes the lock is set into a wooden doorframe. So he pulls out a smuggled metal chisel and starts violently hacking at the wood. In the dead silence of that echoing prison hallway, the sound is literally like gunshots. Crack, crack, crack. Tim is terrified the noise is bouncing straight up to the guard stations, but Leonard just keeps hacking until the wood completely splinters and the entire locking mechanism just falls right out onto the floor.
Here's how this crazy final sequence goes down. The lock pops out, the door swings open, they step into the yard, using a tiny pocket mirror to track the roof sniper spotlight so they can dart from shadow to shadow. They literally walk right out the front gate, strolling straight past guard Mark, who doesn't even recognize them in their civilian clothes. Finally, they reach a segregated taxi stand, jump into a car, and beg the driver to just go.
The driver takes one look at their desperate faces, floors the gas pedal, and drives them into total freedom.
The very next morning, that brutal guard, Mark, angrily storms into Tim's cell to wake him up, only to find rolled-up blankets and a dummy in the bed. An absolutely impossible escape, pulled off with nothing but patience, observation, and some scrap wood. So, the question I want to leave you with today is this. If these guys could literally dismantle an impenetrable fortress with a wooden broomstick and some chewing gum, what impossible obstacle in your own life might you conquer if you just stepped back and approached it from a totally different angle? Thanks so much for exploring this with me.